C.S. Lewis once remarked that pain is a megaphone in order to arouse a deaf world. Nobody likes pain, nobody likes suffering, because pain and suffering make us very vulnerable. We realize that we are not in control, and it just kind of comes upon us, and we never know how that pain or suffering is going to affect us. And the same situation, the same type of suffering can affect each person in a different way. It's why as a priest, very often I know I am asked, Father, why does God allow suffering? Why does suffering exist in our world at all? And I do not have a clear answer for that, but I can speak to you from the heart about today, the gift of faith and the gift of our scriptures, which really lead us into a better understanding of that faith, to realize that God does not create suffering, but He does allow it. It's permitted because it may help us in some way to be able to grow, to be able to be refined into the apostles or the disciples that He wants us to be. So it's not totally gone from the face of the world. You may remember in the beginning of the sacred scriptures, when God created the world, He did not want suffering in the world. He created paradise. He did not create sinfulness. That entered in through the decisions of our ancestors, Adam and Eve. And because of that original sin, evil continues to be in the world. And that evil ends up having a sense of suffering as well for those who are involved. So we have to remember not to get mad at God when there is suffering. He did not make it happen. God does not create it, but He may allow it because it helps us as people, not only individually, but as a population, as a people. Our readings today speak of suffering, the first from Isaiah, referring to the suffering servant of God, that the suffering that is expected and that is to be undergone is one that is to end up having a sense of justification or freedom for others in the future. See, there's something in our Catholic faith that we call redemptive suffering. And our redemptive suffering is such that we may have pains and suffering and wonder why are we afflicted in this way. But we have to understand and realize it may be for our own salvation. It may be for helping someone else get to heaven. So we offer it up. Because the true suffering servant of all, Jesus Christ, gave His whole life for us. And that was for our redemption. So the people of Israel questioned and said, why does it seem that those who are prosperous end up becoming more prosperous, but they're wicked? Why are they rewarded? They're not rewarded. But it seemed as though the people that were just, the people that were living their lives in the best possible way, that they were suffering because they were in tune with it. And so really Isaiah is speaking that suffering is a part of our life. The reading from Hebrews speaks of Jesus as a high priest going from this earth directly to the heavens, not having to pass through the Holy of Holies, but rather He made a sacrifice for us. He gave His life for us, that we may be able to come to know who God is and where He is in the kingdom of heaven, because Jesus showed us the way. You see, He puts a human face on sacrifice and on suffering. So if you ever wanted to know who to go to in a time of challenge or difficulty, go to the Lord. Because when we go to the Lord, He can look straight in our eyes. He knows what it is to be human more than anyone else. That's the incredible sacrifice that God gave for me and for you. He gave His Son. He gave Himself to be able to be crucified, to die at the hands of evil people, in order that we may be able to understand that there's life after this world. There's life with God. And in our gospel reading today, we have James and John, who are asking a lot of questions. They're really kind of bold, actually. It's thought that they were the youngest of the disciples, of the apostles, the youngest of the 12. And so maybe they were just naive. And so that in their naivety, they're asking to be at more important places at the table. Maybe in their naivety, when Jesus said to them, "Can you drink the cup?" He was inviting them into a participation and a partnership in suffering. And they just said, "Yes, we can." They didn't know what that would mean. That cup is heavy. That cup is one that was going to bring pain, that was going to bring really martyrdom for them, resurrection for Christ and for them, but not without suffering to be had in the meantime. James and John are remembered here in our church. The cup up here in the second window is in honor of John. When he was asked, can you drink the cup? And he said, yes, I can. His brother is James, represented here by the shells, because they were fishermen and they're familiar with the shore. But really it is Jesus who tells them, the Son of Man will give his life as a ransom for many. You know, Jesus didn't just give his wallet. Jesus didn't just give his house. Jesus gave his whole self that we might have life as a ransom for many in place of us. And so Jesus gave that, and really what he said was, I'm going to be able to give you not a loss of suffering, but a loss of wondering if you'll get into heaven. He gives us hope to be one day in the kingdom of heaven. So when it comes to suffering, we cannot go and blame God and go right to him and say, God, why are you allowing this to happen? That's a valid question to ask. But remember that God is all-knowing. He knows that we are in pain. He knows what our tears are shed for. God is all-loving. He loves us more than we love ourselves. But he's also a parent. So God is our Father. He realizes that we have to learn through pain and suffering in order to deal with it. We don't live our lives in a bubble. We don't live like in some isolated place. And I know sometimes parents want their children not to have any pain or suffering. We don't want to inflict it ever. But we have to realize it's part of life. We are not protected from it. And at younger ages, as we continue to grow, it strengthens us. And so maybe perhaps in God's all-loving way, as a father, he's reaching out. He's there to cradle us. He's there to give us the hug when the tears are shed. And finally, God is all-powerful. And so God has the ability, as St. Augustine said, to turn evil into good. And guess what? Only God can do that. Maybe our sufferings that we have, our challenges, come about because of the fact that maybe they're smaller now and then they grow and God's preparing us. Perhaps it's stopping us from a greater suffering we may have later in life. When there is incredible tragedy, like when something happens to a child or something is unexplainable or a natural disaster, well, those are things that at a funeral I always say we have questions. And it's okay to question God, why did it happen? But just know you may not get an answer now. But hold it in your heart. And instead of getting angry with him, say, Lord, I want some understanding. Give me the grace of understanding, the grace of compassion. Ask and you shall receive. Knock and the door shall be opened. We cannot be afraid to ask for the grace. You see, for ourselves, when it comes to suffering, we don't want it. We want to have a good life, and we don't want to have to be brought down. But sadly, it is a part of our lives, and it can help to strengthen us and to build us up to be a stronger disciple, to be the person that God wants us to be. Remember, he said to John and to James, can you drink the cup? He invited them into that suffering, into the heaviness, and into the burden. I can tell you in my own life how I try to deal with suffering, setbacks, pains, challenges. One thing is being a pastor. I'll be honest with you, there's days that I look back and I think back to 1998 to 2005 when I was here as an associate pastor. You know what? Life was good back then. I didn't have a whole lot of responsibility. I was kind of shielded from it. But I tell you, when you kind of start going up and you realize you have more responsibility, well, in a good way, more challenges come with that. And there's some days when I kind of say, wow, you know, Lord, I remember the words of John the 23rd. When he would go to bed at night, he would say to God, God, it's your church. Please take care of it. And I kind of feel sometimes the same way because I know that as a pastor, I'm going to make decisions that not everyone's going to like. Maybe you have to do that in your business or in your profession. And you realize that it's hard. There's suffering, there's pain that's involved in that. And I might long for the other days, but I also say, this is where I'm at now. Lord, bring it on. And help me to grow, because by growing, we are able to be stronger. When we are weak, it is when we are strongest. St. Paul said that in his writings about how when we are weakest, it's when we are strongest with God. So in our weakness, in our inadequacy, in our humility, we have to realize what our capacity and our capability is and realize we're not alone, that we have to go to God for help. We cannot do it alone. Secondly, I can tell you in a personal way, recently on October 11th, it would have been my dad's 80th birthday, and I thought about that. You know, he passed away in 2002, so 16 years ago. And it kind of came to me, I wonder what he would have looked like at 80. I wonder what his personality would have been like. He was always kind of a gentle soul. I wonder if he would have gotten kind of crotchety. I hope not, and I don't think that he would have, but we never know. But I thought about him, and then I said, wow, I've lost a lot of people in my life. My mother, my father, my brother. But do I take that and do I allow it to weigh me down? No, I don't. I try to say, God, I don't know why these things have happened. I don't know why I feel like some people in my family were taken at an earlier age. But I'm not going to get angry with him about it. I say, Lord, help me with the understanding. I would encourage you to do the same. Go to the foot of the cross. Sit and look up at Christ and ask, Lord, help me in my challenge. Help me in my pain. Help me in my suffering. You see, when we actually have our own challenges and difficulties, it also makes us more compassionate to realize there's others suffering in the world. That we then are in solidarity with those who have perhaps financial issues, relationship problems, victims of domestic violence or human trafficking, the poor in the Dominican Republic or Haiti, people who have natural disasters. When we realize our own challenges and difficulties, that no one is in this bubble, then and only then, I have the feeling it makes God probably very happy to realize we're walking with others in the journey, that we're helping them to be able to be lifted up and to be raised up. So think today of what is your challenge? What is the difficulty maybe that you are facing in your own life? Is it grief? Is it relationship? Is it financial? Is it work-related? What does it have to do with? Is it a physical issue? What do you do with that? Do you go running from God, or does it bring you closer to Him? He's inviting us. He's asking you, can you drink the cup with me? He's not just doing it alone. He wants to walk with us in that suffering. St. Faustina had a beautiful quote. She said how suffering is something which can really help us because it's a beautiful grace. It helps our soul become closer to God. It crystallizes our relationship with God, and the greater the suffering, the greater the love. So think about that. Whatever we are weighed down by, we bring it to the Lord to realize He's our partner with that suffering and challenge. We are not alone. As He says to us in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon your shoulder and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. My yoke is easy and my burden is light."